I was holding a glass of sparkling rosé at my own bridal shower when my future mother-in-law stood up, smiled at the room, and handed me a neatly printed document titled Expectations for Emily Carter. Everyone watched as I unfolded it, thinking it was a joke, until I saw the first line. All financial decisions will be managed by the Brooks family. My fingers went cold. By the third rule, I couldn't feel my hands anymore. And when I looked up, hoping someone would laugh, every single person was smiling like this was completely normal. If this story speaks to your heart, only if it truly resonates with you, take a second to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, and what time it is for you right now. I always read every comment, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and that afternoon, in a room filled with flowers and people who were supposed to welcome me into a family, was the moment everything in my life quietly broke apart. It started 2 weeks before the wedding, on a warm Saturday afternoon in Napa Valley, where Daniel's family insisted on hosting my bridal shower at their estate. A sprawling 6,000-square-foot home with manicured gardens, white roses lining the walkway, and a view that stretched for miles over rolling vineyards. I remember thinking it looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of place where everything should feel perfect. Inside, the dining room had been decorated in soft blush tones, gold accents catching the sunlight pouring through the tall windows, and a long table set with delicate china and handwritten place cards. My name was centered at the head of the table, Emily Brooks, written in elegant cursive that made my stomach tighten just a little. I hadn't even changed my name yet, but somehow they already had. Margaret Brooks greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek, her hand lingering just a second too long on my arm as she smiled, that controlled, practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "We're so excited to finally welcome you properly," she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. Behind her, Lily leaned against the staircase, scrolling on her phone before glancing up at me with a quick once-over, her lips curling into a small, knowing smirk. Daniel was nowhere in sight. "He'll be here later," Margaret said when I asked, brushing it off like it didn't matter. "Today is about you becoming part of our family." I should have noticed the way she said that. Becoming part of our family. Not joining, not celebrating. Becoming, like something was about to be reshaped. The afternoon moved along with polite laughter, small talk, and gifts wrapped in pastel paper. I opened kitchen appliances I hadn't asked for, books on modern homemaking, and a planner already filled with notes in Margaret's handwriting. Every time I laughed, it felt a little more forced, like I was trying to match a tone I didn't fully understand. Then, halfway through dessert, Margaret tapped her glass with a fork, the soft clink cutting through the room as conversations faded. "Before we finish," she said, standing slowly, "there's something important we'd like to share with Emily." My chest tightened. She reached into her designer tote and pulled out a slim stack of papers, clipped neatly together, and walked toward me with that same calm, controlled smile. "Just a few guidelines," she said lightly, placing them into my hands, "to help you adjust." The paper felt heavier than it should have. I remember the exact moment the room went quiet. Not awkward, not confused. Quiet like everyone already knew what was about to happen. I looked down. Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 3. By the time I reached the last line at the bottom of the page, something inside me shifted, slow and irreversible. And when I finally looked up, I realized I wasn't the only one who had known about this. I read the last line again because my brain refused to process it the first time. All assets currently owned or acquired after marriage will be transferred into the Brooks Family Trust under joint oversight. My name was printed underneath, followed by a blank line for my signature. My signature. My throat tightened. I looked up slowly, scanning the room, waiting for someone to say this had gone too far, that it was a misunderstanding, that it was a joke taken too seriously. But no one moved. Margaret stood there calmly, her hands folded in front of her like she was presenting a gift. Lily was watching me now, no longer pretending to be distracted, her eyes sharp, curious, almost entertained. And then I saw my mother, sitting halfway down the table, hands wrapped around her coffee cup, eyes fixed on me with something I could not quite name. Not shock, not concern, something quieter, something that felt like agreement. I turned to her first because I needed her to break this. "Mom?" My voice came out softer than I expected, almost like I was asking for permission to react. She hesitated for a second, just 1 second, then gave me a small nod. "It is just how families like theirs do things, Emily," she said gently, like she was explaining something obvious. Families like theirs. The words echoed in my head. I felt something drop in my chest, heavy and final. I shifted my gaze to Daniel as he walked into the room, finally, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. He moved casually, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, glancing at the paper in my hands before looking at me. No surprise, no confusion, just a quiet expectation. "You got it?" he asked, like I had just opened a package he had ordered online. I stared at him, searching his face for something familiar, something that reminded me of the man I thought I was about to marry. "Daniel, what is this?" I asked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, but not enough that others could not hear. "It is just structure," he said. "My family likes to keep things organized. It protects everyone. Protects everyone." I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. "Protects who?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the paper. He exhaled, like I was already making this harder than it needed to be. "Emily, do not make this a problem," he said quietly. "It is standard. You are joining the family. There are expectations." There it was again. Expectations. Not partnership. Not love. Expectations. I glanced back down at the list, and for the first time, I started to notice the details I had missed in the shock. Dates. Legal phrasing. Clauses that referenced documents I had never seen. This was not something written last night. This had been planned, reviewed, probably by lawyers. My pulse slowed, not because I was calming down, but because something inside me was shifting into a different kind of awareness. I looked up again, this time not at Daniel, but at Margaret. "When was this written?" I asked. Her smile did not change. "We have been working on it for a while," she said smoothly. "We wanted everything to be clear before the wedding. Before the wedding. Not with me. Without me." I nodded slowly, like I understood, like I was taking it seriously, like I was considering it. The room seemed to relax just a little, like they were all waiting for me to fall into place. I could feel their attention on me, measuring, assessing, deciding if I was going to be easy or difficult. I smoothed the edge of the paper with my thumb, forcing my hands to stay steady. "Okay," I said softly. One word. The exact word they were waiting for. Margaret's shoulders relaxed. Lily leaned back in her chair, satisfied. My mother looked relieved. Daniel gave a small nod, like I had just passed some kind of test, but inside, everything had gone completely still, because in that moment, I understood something they did not. This was not about me adjusting. This was about them assuming I already belonged to them, and they were wrong. I folded the paper carefully, aligning the edges like it mattered, like I was treating it with respect. But as I held it in my hands, I felt something else rising beneath the shock, beneath the hurt. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something clearer. Because if they had planned this so carefully without me, then what else had they planned that I did not know about? I did not read the rest of the list out loud. I did not question them again. Instead, I sat there for a few more minutes, smiling when I needed to, nodding when someone made a comment about how every strong family has structure, and pretending that nothing inside me had shifted. I even laughed once when Lily made a joke about how I would get used to it faster than I thought. The strange part was, the more I stayed quiet, the more comfortable they became. Margaret started talking about the wedding seating chart again. My mother joined in, suggesting small adjustments like she had been part of these conversations all along. Daniel poured himself a drink and leaned against the counter, completely relaxed now, like the hardest part of the day was over, and maybe for them it was, but for me it was just beginning. I excused myself about 20 minutes later, saying I needed some air. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. That, more than anything, stayed with me. I walked out through the back garden, past the white roses and the perfectly trimmed hedges, and kept going until I reached the edge of the property where the gravel path met the vineyard rows. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the ground, and for a moment, everything looked calm. Too calm. I stood there, holding that folded paper in my hand, and finally let myself read it again. Slowly, line by line. This time, I noticed the details I had missed before. Specific account structures, references to existing assets under Emily Carter, language about post-marital integration of independent holdings. This was not just about control after the wedding. This included everything I already owned, my savings, my condo in San Diego, the small investment portfolio my father helped me build before he passed. Everything. My stomach turned. I had never discussed any of this with Daniel in detail. He knew I was financially stable, but I had always kept the specifics private, not out of secrecy, but because it had never felt necessary to lay everything out. Until now. I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving almost on instinct, and opened my notes app. I started typing phrases from the document, capturing what I could remember in case this paper somehow disappeared later. Because something about all of this felt too calculated to be accidental, too precise to be a last-minute decision. A breeze moved through the vines, soft and steady, but I barely felt it. My focus had narrowed completely. I thought back to small moments over the past few months, conversations I had brushed off. Questions Daniel had asked casually about my accounts, my investments, my long-term plans. The way Margaret once joked at dinner that it is important to know what is coming into the family. I had laughed at the time. I had thought she meant traditions. Not this. Not legal ownership. Not control. I stood there for what felt like a long time, replaying everything in my head, trying to find the exact point where this stopped being a relationship and became a transaction. And then, as I turned to head back toward the house, something stopped me. Voices, low, just beyond the hedge line near the side patio. I froze without thinking, my body reacting before my mind caught up. It was Margaret and my mother. I could not see them, but I could hear them clearly enough through the gap in the leaves. "She took it better than I expected," Margaret said, her voice calm, almost impressed. There was a pause. Then my mother answered, "She has always been. Adaptable." Adaptable. I felt my chest tighten. "Good," Margaret continued. "The sooner she signs, the easier everything becomes. We cannot afford delays with the transfer timeline." Transfer timeline. My grip on the paper tightened. "And Daniel?" my mother asked quietly. "He understands what is at stake?" Margaret let out a soft, confident breath. "He knows exactly what he is doing. Once the marriage is official, everything consolidates. The trust takes control, and from there, it is seamless." Seamless. I stared straight ahead, my mind suddenly very clear, because in that moment, I understood something I had not allowed myself to fully accept before. This was not just about expectations. This was not just about control. This was a plan, a structured and deliberate plan that had been built long before I ever walked into that room. And the worst part was not that they had created it. It was that they had expected me to walk straight into it without ever questioning a thing. I did not move right away. I stood there behind the hedge, holding my breath like if I made the smallest sound, everything would collapse before I was ready. My heart was beating, but slower now, steadier, like something inside me had shifted from panic into focus. Margaret's voice carried again, calm and controlled. "We just need her signature before the wedding. After that, it is automatic." Automatic. The word echoed in my head. My mother responded, softer this time. "And if she hesitates?" There was a brief silence, and I leaned in just slightly, barely daring to breathe. Margaret let out a quiet, almost amused laugh. "She will not. She wants this life. They always do. They always do." I felt something cold settle deep in my chest. Not hurt, not even anger, something sharper. Because in that moment, I realized they did not see me as a person making a choice. They saw me as a step in a process, a predictable outcome, a signature waiting to happen. I stepped back slowly, careful not to disturb the gravel beneath my feet, and turned away before they could come around the corner. My mind was already moving, connecting pieces, replaying every word. Transfer timeline, trust control, signature before the wedding. This was not just a suggestion, it was a deadline. I walked back toward the house, each step measured, each breath controlled. By the time I reached the patio doors, I had already made one decision. I would not confront them. Not yet. Inside, the room looked exactly the same as when I left. Soft music, light laughter, glasses clinking. Daniel glanced up as I entered, his expression neutral for a second, before settling into that familiar, easy smile. "You okay?" he asked, like nothing had changed. I nodded, matching his tone. Just needed some air. He studied me for a brief moment, like he was checking for cracks, then relaxed again. Good, he said, taking a sip of his drink. I did not want you to overthink things. I almost smiled at that. Not want me to overthink, as if thinking was the problem. I walked back to the table and picked up the paper again, unfolding it slowly, deliberately. This time, I looked at it like it was evidence, not a proposal. Every line, every clause, every carefully chosen word. Margaret watched me from across the table, her expression patient, confident. We can have our attorney walk you through it, she offered smoothly. Just to make everything clear, I met her gaze and gave a small nod. That would be helpful, I said. My voice sounded calm, too calm. Lily raised an eyebrow like she was surprised I had not pushed back more. My mother avoided my eyes completely. And Daniel? He just looked relieved. That was the moment I knew for sure. He was not confused. He was not caught in the middle. He was part of this. I folded the paper again, more carefully this time, and placed it in my bag. I will take a closer look tonight, I added. Margaret smiled, satisfied. Of course, she said, take your time. We just want everything settled before the big day. Before the big day. The phrase sounded different now. Not like a celebration, like a deadline. I stayed for another 30 minutes. I opened a few more gifts. I thanked people. I played the role they expected me to play so well that no one questioned it. But inside, everything had changed. Because now I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, they had already decided what my future would look like. And second, they had no idea I was no longer following their script. As I said my goodbyes and walked toward my car, the late afternoon sun dipping lower behind the hills, I felt that same stillness settle over me again. Not confusion, not fear, clarity. Because if they believed they had everything under control, then they would never see what I was about to do next. I did not drive home right away. I sat in my car with the engine off, the folded paper resting in my lap, and just stared at it like it might change if I gave it enough time. The sun was dropping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the windshield, but I barely noticed. My mind was already moving 3 steps ahead. Signature before the wedding, transfer timeline, trust control. The words repeated in my head until they stopped sounding like threats and started sounding like a plan I could break. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the one person I had not spoken to in months but trusted more than anyone when it came to things like this, David Klein, my attorney. I hesitated for half a second, then pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. Emily? His voice carried that same calm precision I remembered. It has been a while. I need you, I said, skipping everything else. There was a brief pause on the line. Not confusion, just attention. Tell me what is going on. I took a breath and started explaining. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just facts. The document, the clauses, the trust, the timeline, the conversation I overheard. By the time I finished, the light outside had faded into a soft gray. David did not interrupt once. When I stopped, he let a few seconds pass before speaking again. Do you still have the document? He asked. Yes. Good. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything verbally that could be interpreted as consent. And Emily, his tone shifted slightly, more serious now. This is not standard. This is structured asset capture. The phrase landed harder than anything else that day. Structured asset capture. Not family expectations, not tradition. A strategy. Can they actually do this? I asked quietly. Not without your signature, he said. And not if you move first. Move first. I felt something steady lock into place inside me. What do I need to do? I asked. Come to my office tomorrow morning, he said. Bring everything you have. We are going to review it line by line. And Emily, if what you are saying is accurate, you are not just walking away from a bad marriage. You are stepping out of a legal trap. I ended the call a few minutes later, my hands still wrapped around the phone. Legal trap. The words echoed in my head, but they did not scare me anymore. They clarified everything. I started the car, the engine humming to life, and for the first time since that afternoon, I felt something close to control returning. The drive back to my apartment in San Francisco took just under an hour, but I barely registered the traffic, the lights, the familiar streets. My focus was entirely on what came next. When I got home, I did not turn on the television. I did not change clothes. I went straight to my desk, pulled out my laptop, and opened every financial file I had. Account statements, property records, investment summaries. I reviewed everything with a level of detail I had never needed before, checking access points, ownership structures, anything that could be exposed or vulnerable. Around 9:30 that night, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice even. "Hey," he replied, his tone casual, almost light. "You left pretty quickly today." "I was tired," I said, a small lie, delivered smoothly. "It was a lot." He let out a quiet breath, like he had been expecting that. "I get it. It is new for you, but it is nothing to worry about. My family just likes things to be clear." "Clear," I almost smiled. "I understand," I said. There was a brief silence. Then he added, "Did you look over the document again?" I glanced at the papers spread across my desk. "I will go through it tonight," I replied. "Good," he said. "We should try to get everything finalized before the weekend. It will make things easier." "Easier? For him? For them?" "Of course," I said softly. "I want everything to be right." He sounded relieved again. "That is why I love you," he said. I closed my eyes for a second, not from emotion, but from clarity, because in that moment, I realized something I had not fully accepted before. The man I thought I was going to marry was not confused. He was not being influenced. He was aligned. Completely. "I will call you tomorrow," I said, ending the conversation before he could say anything else. When the line went silent, I placed the phone down carefully and looked back at the documents in front of me. Then I reached for the folder with the printed rules and set it beside everything else. For the first time, I was not looking at it as something they wanted from me. I was looking at it as something they had given me. Evidence. Because if they believed I was about to walk into their plan without question, then they had already made their biggest mistake. A few months later, my life looks nothing like the one I almost signed away that afternoon, and yet for the first time in a long time, everything feels quieter, clearer, and entirely my own. The wedding never happened. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no scene designed for anyone else to witness. I met Daniel once more, in a quiet office with my attorney sitting beside me, and I watched his confidence unravel not with emotion, but with facts. He tried to explain, to soften it, to call it a misunderstanding, but there is something about truth when it is laid out in black and white that leaves no room for performance. I did not argue. I did not need to. I simply stood up, thanked him for showing me exactly who he was before it was too late, and walked away. I blocked every number connected to that family before I even reached my car. My mother called me 3 days later. I let it ring. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood that love without respect is just another form of control, and I was done negotiating my worth. Today, I still live in the same apartment in San Francisco, the one I almost gave up without realizing it. My mornings are slower now. I make my own coffee, sit by the window, and for the first time, I listen to that quiet voice inside me that I used to ignore. The one that warned me, the one that hesitated when things did not feel right. I used to think that voice was fear. Now I know it was protection. What I learned from all of this is simple, but it took me almost losing everything to understand it. Not every invitation is meant to be accepted. Not every family is meant to become yours. And love, real love, does not come with conditions that require you to shrink, to sign away your independence, or to silence your instincts just to belong. If something feels off, it is not because you are overthinking. It is because you are paying attention. And that matters. If you are listening to this right now, and you feel that same pressure, that same quiet discomfort you cannot explain, please hear me when I say this. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to question. You are allowed to walk away, even if everything around you tells you to stay. Protect your name. Protect your finances. Protect your peace. Because once you give those things away, it is much harder to take them back. And no relationship is worth the cost of losing yourself. I believe, in a quiet way, that God, or the universe, or whatever you choose to believe in, will always place a moment in front of you where you can choose truth over comfort. That bridal shower was mine. It did not feel like a blessing at the time. It felt like humiliation, but it was the clearest answer I could have ever been given. So if you are at that moment in your life right now, trust it. Even if it hurts, even if it changes everything, because sometimes walking away is not the end of something. It is the beginning of finally being free. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Truly. If you have ever felt something similar, I would love to hear where you are listening from, your city, your country, and what time it is for you right now. Sharing these stories reminds us that we are not alone in the choices we have to make. My name is Emily Carter. I am 29 years old, and the lesson I want to leave with you is this: never sign away your worth just to belong somewhere you were never meant to stay.